Tonight it is easy to imagine the Earth as a world defined by height. Snow resting on distant peaks, jagged ridges cutting across continents, vast mountain chains standing like ancient walls beneath the clouds. They feel permanent, almost timeless, as though they have always watched over the planet exactly as they do now. But there was a time when none of them existed. Long before the Himalayas rose into the sky, before the Andes stretched beside the western seas, before the Alps gathered snow across Europe, the Earth may have looked profoundly different, stranger than most people ever imagine, quitter, wider, emptier. The world was not completely flat, but it lacked the towering horizons that shape human life today. Across enormous distances, the land rolled outward beneath heavy skies without dramatic interruption. Rivers wandered slowly through endless plains. Coastlines shifted constantly, free from the rocky barriers that now anchor continents in place. Storms traveled across the surface without meeting walls of stone strong enough to weaken them. If someone could stand within that ancient world, the horizon might have appeared almost infinite. There would be no distant peaks catching sunlight at dawn, no sharp silhouettes dividing the sky, only vast open land fading into mist and darkness beneath an atmosphere unlike the one humans know now. Modern people rarely question the existence of mountains. They seem older than memory itself. Children grow up drawing them before understanding what they are. Ancient civilizations worship them. Entire religions formed around them. Human language treats mountains as symbols of permanence because they appear impossible to move. Yet the Earth has never been still. Beneath the calm appearance of continents, the planet has always been changing shape. Oceans opened and disappeared. Land drifted suddenly across the globe. Regions that are now dry deserts once rested beneath shallow seas filled with unfamiliar life. The world humans inherited is only the latest arrangement in a much older process. And in that older Earth, mountains were late arrivals. That idea feels unsettling at first because it removes something deeply familiar from the human imagination. Without mountains, the planet begins to feel almost alien. Weather behaves differently. Water travels differently. Even life experiences the world differently. The winds move farther without interruption. Rain spreads across enormous lowlands instead of gathering against high slopes. Rivers flood outward rather than carving through narrow valleys. The boundaries that now separate climates barely exist. The Earth becomes open in a way that is difficult to picture, but something even stranger hides beneath that silence. Mountains did not simply appear as decoration added to the surface of the world. They may have transformed nearly everything they touched: climate, oceans, evolution, the movement of water, the survival of species, perhaps even the path that eventually led to humanity itself. The familiar planet people know today may only exist because the Earth slowly learned how to raise its surface toward the sky. And if that is true, then the ancient mountainless world was not an incomplete version of modern Earth. It was an entirely different planet, a quieter one, a flatter one, a world still waiting for forces hidden deep beneath the surface to begin reshaping everything above it. Before the Earth lifted mountains into the sky, the planet was ruled by movement. Nothing remained stable for very long. The surface cracked, shifted, melted, and reformed beneath dark ancient oceans and thick clouds heavy with moisture. Land appeared, vanished, and appeared again. Vast volcanic regions glowed beside shallow seas. Heat escaped constantly from deep within the young world, rising through fragile crust that had not yet settled into the continents humans recognized today. It was not a peaceful Earth. It was a restless one. The ground beneath the oceans trembled with invisible pressure. Molten rock pushed upward through fractures in the crust, spilling fire across enormous distances. Islands formed from eruptions and disappeared beneath water again. Entire regions may have existed only briefly before sinking back into the planet beneath them. And above this unstable surface, storms traveled freely. Without massive mountain systems to interrupt wind or redirect rain, weather moved across the Earth differently than it does now. Moisture spread across immense lowlands. Winds circled the globe with fewer barriers to weaken them. Ocean currents drifted through wider pathways. The atmosphere itself behaved like something untamed, constantly shifting over a planet that could not fully settle. Modern Earth feels organized by comparison. Today, mountains divide climates into recognizable regions. They trap rainfall, guide rivers, and slow the movement of storms. But in this earlier world, those controls barely existed. The boundaries humans take for granted had not yet formed. Water and heat moved with a freedom that made the planet feel almost unfinished. That unfinished quality may be the most important detail of all. The ancient Earth was not simply waiting quietly for mountains to appear. Deep beneath the oceans and continents, forces were already building towards something violent enough to transform the entire surface of the planet. The continents themselves were moving. Slowly, almost impossibly slowly, giant masses of land drifted through darkness across the face of the Earth. Over millions of years they approached one another, separated again, and collided with unimaginable force. The crust folded under pressure. Layers of rock bent and rose upward. Ancient seabeds were pushed toward the sky. And from those collisions mountains began to emerge. Not as decorations, not as isolated accidents of nature, but as consequences of planetary chaos powerful enough to reshape the atmosphere itself. As mountain ranges slowly rose higher, winds changed direction. Rainfall gathered differently. Rivers gained speed and force. The climate of the Earth began shifting into new patterns that had never existed before. The strange flat world was starting to disappear. Yet even then the planet remained unstable. Volcanoes still burned across enormous regions. Oceans continued opening and closing. The crust beneath the continents kept moving silently through geological time, carrying entire landscapes toward futures no living creature could imagine. The Earth was still building itself, and somewhere within that unfinished world, beneath storms that traveled endlessly across open horizons, life was already beginning to adapt to conditions unlike anything humans would later consider normal. The world humans know today was born from that instability. Mountains were only one result of a much deeper process unfolding beneath the surface for billions of years. Every coastline, every valley, every familiar season would eventually emerge from forces hidden far below the crust. But at this stage in Earth's story, none of those systems had fully settled into place. The planet still behaved like something unfinished, suspended between creation and destruction. Fire rose from below. Water spread across the surface. Continents wandered through darkness while storms crossed oceans without rest. And within this strange environment, life faced a version of Earth almost impossible to imagine now. The first organisms did not evolve beneath stable mountain horizons or within climates humans would recognize. They emerged inside a restless world shaped by heat, shifting seas, and endless motion. Before mountains controlled the planet, water and fire remained the true rulers of Earth, shaping every horizon without pause or mercy endlessly. Long before mountains divided the Earth into separate climates and distant ecosystems, life existed within a world that felt far more open than the planet humans know today. The landscapes were quieter then. No snowy peaks stood against the horizon. No isolated valleys hid species from one another. Across enormous distances, low continents stretched beneath heavy skies while shallow seas spread across much of the surface. Water moved freely across the land. Winds traveled farther. Rivers wandered slowly through immense plains without steep terrain, forcing them into narrow paths. And within that flatter world, life began adapting to conditions unlike anything familiar now. The earliest ecosystems did not evolve beside mountain forests or high cold ridges. They developed across coastlines, wetlands, shallow oceans, and broad low environments where few natural barriers existed. Organisms spread through open regions without encountering the sharp environmental divisions created by towering landscapes. In many ways, the ancient Earth may have felt biologically connected. Today, mountains separate worlds. One side of a range may hold rainforests while the other becomes dry grassland or desert. Species evolve differently because geography traps them apart for millions of years. Isolation shapes survival. Entire ecosystems exist because mountains force life to adapt separately beneath different climates. But before those barriers emerged, the planet operated differently. Life could move farther. Oceans connected regions more openly. Wet environments stretched across enormous areas. Species encountered fewer obstacles preventing migration. The boundaries that now divide habitats into isolated systems were still weak or missing entirely. That may have changed evolution itself. Without massive mountain ranges separating populations, ancient organisms may have evolved more gradually across wider connected landscapes. The differences between regions were softer, less extreme. Life adapted within open environments rather than fragmented ones. The Earth was still diverse, but its diversity unfolded differently, and perhaps more slowly. This creates a strange possibility. Many of the ecosystems humans now consider natural may only exist because mountains eventually fractured the world apart. Forests isolated from one another evolved separately. Animals trapped within distant valleys adapted to entirely different conditions. Rainfall changed. Rivers shifted. Climates divided. The rise of mountains transformed one connected biosphere into countless environmental islands spread across continents. In a quiet and unexpected way, mountains may have created diversity by separating life. That idea changes the meaning of the natural world. The planet humans inherited was not inevitable. Its ecosystems were shaped by division, pressure, isolation, and geological change, unfolding over immense spans of time. Without mountains, many familiar species might never have appeared at all. Entire evolutionary paths could have unfolded differently beneath flatter skies. And yet, in this older Earth, life continued moving through open horizons untouched by towering stone. There is something strangely peaceful about imagining that world, a horizon without peaks, an endless distance where land slowly disappears into mist beneath ancient clouds, shallow seas reflecting dim light across enormous plains, winds crossing continents without interruption, early life spreading quietly through wetlands and coastal regions, while the planet itself remains unfinished beneath them. It feels less like the modern Earth and more like a memory from a forgotten age. The silence would not last forever. Deep beneath the surface, invisible forces continued building pressure within the restless crust of the planet. Continents drifted slowly across geological time. Oceans shifted. Heat rose upward from below. And eventually the Earth would begin changing in a way that transformed climate, rivers, ecosystems, and life itself. The flat horizons would rise, the open world would fracture, and mountains, those enormous structures humans now see as permanent parts of nature, would begin reshaping the future of the planet in ways no living organism could possibly understand. Because the appearance of mountains was never only about stone reaching toward the sky. It was the beginning of a chain reaction that would alter the destiny of Earth forever. The Earth does not transform itself in moments that human eyes could easily recognize. Its greatest changes often happen too slowly to witness, too slowly to feel, too slowly for any living creature to fully understand while they are unfolding. Mountains, despite their enormous presence, were not born in sudden explosions rising dramatically into the sky. Their creation began with motion so small it would have appeared invisible, a few centimeters each year, less than the growth of human fingernails. Yet over millions of years, that quiet movement became powerful enough to reshape the entire surface of the planet. Far beneath oceans and continents, the crust of the Earth never truly rests. Massive sections of land drift slowly across the globe, carrying climates, rivers, coastlines, and ecosystems with them like enormous rafts floating above deeper layers of heat and pressure. The movement is constant, even now, though human lives are too brief to notice it directly. Ancient continents wandered through geological time in silence. For millions of years they traveled separately across dark oceans, changing direction gradually as invisible forces beneath them shifted and pulled. Entire seas opened between them. Other seas slowly disappeared. The geography of the Earth rearranged itself continuously while life adapted to landscapes that never remained fixed for very long. And eventually, some of those drifting worlds began approaching one another. At first, nothing dramatic happened. The oceans between them simply became narrower over immense spans of time. Coastlines shifted slightly. Sediments gathered along the edges of continents where shallow seas slowly compressed beneath growing pressure. The process felt calm on the surface, almost peaceful, but deep below, tension continued building. As continents moved closer, neither could easily sink beneath the other. Their enormous masses resisted downward movement, forcing the crust upward instead. Layers of rock folded slowly under pressure. Ancient seabeds bent and fractured. Land that once rested near sea levels began rising almost imperceptibly toward the sky. Not within years, not within centuries, but across spans of time so large they are difficult for the human mind to truly imagine. Generation after generation of life appeared and vanished while the ground continued lifting silently upward. Forests grew and disappeared. Oceans advanced and retreated. Entire species evolved and went extinct before the rising landscapes revealed their true scale. And eventually, mountains emerged, not as isolated towers, not as decorations added to the earth, but as scars left behind by collisions between continents powerful enough to deform the surface of the planet itself. Every major mountain range on Earth may carry evidence of ancient violence hidden inside its stone. The Himalayas, the Alps, the Andes. Each one marks regions where drifting landmasses eventually met after wandering across the Earth for unimaginable stretches of time. The peaks humans admire today are records of impact. That realization changes the meaning of mountains completely. They are not permanent symbols of stillness. They are signs that the Earth beneath the oceans is alive and constantly rearranging itself. The planet behaves less like solid, unmoving ground and more like a slow heartbeat unfolding beneath continents and seas. And the movement never truly stops. Even now, mountains continue rising in some places, while erosion slowly destroys them in others. Continents still drift across the globe. Oceans continue changing shape. The Earth remains unfinished, still shaping itself beneath human civilization, exactly as it did long before humans existed. But something else began changing as mountains slowly rose higher into the atmosphere. The sky itself. Winds encountered barriers they had never faced before. Rainfall shifted. Rivers changed direction. Climates began dividing into separate worlds, and the consequences of those rising landscapes would reach far beyond stone alone. At first, the rising mountains changed the Earth so slowly that almost nothing appeared different. The continents still drifted through geological time. Oceans continued moving against distant shores. Storms crossed enormous regions beneath ancient skies, much as they always had. But as the peaks grew higher, something invisible began happening above them. The atmosphere itself started to change. Before mountain ranges dominated the continents, winds traveled across the planet with fewer interruptions. Moisture spread more evenly across wide landscapes. Storm systems moved freely over low terrain. The Earth remained comparatively open, connected by flowing air and shifting weather patterns that crossed vast distances without obstruction. But mountains altered that openness. The moment great walls of stone began rising into the path of moving air, the sky behaved differently. Winds that once traveled uninterrupted were forced upward against cold, high slopes. Moisture gathered. Clouds thickened. Rain began falling heavily across one side of continents while dry conditions slowly emerged on the other. The Earth started dividing itself into separate climates. Wet forests expanded in some regions. Elsewhere, enormous dry plains formed beneath skies that carried less rain than before. Rivers changed direction as water flowed away from elevated terrain. Snow accumulated in colder highlands, storing moisture that would later feed rivers far below during warmer seasons. Mountains were not simply reshaping the land. They were reorganizing the movement of water and air across the entire planet. That transformation may have changed nearly everything. Today, people often think of weather as something temporary and unpredictable, disconnected from the deeper structure of the Earth itself. Storms arrive and disappear. Rain falls. Seasons change. But much of the modern atmosphere may depend on geological features formed across millions of years beneath the surface of the planet. Without mountains, many familiar climate systems might not exist at all. The monsoon rains that sustain entire populations. The dry deserts stretching behind major ranges. The snow-fed rivers supporting forests and agriculture. Even the path storms follow across oceans and continents may have been redirected by mountains long before humans appeared. The peaks became climate machines, and as they continued rising, their influence spread farther. Ocean circulation patterns shifted as winds changed direction. Cold regions expanded where high elevations reflected sunlight back into space. Rainfall gathered unevenly across continents, creating isolated environments where life adapted differently beneath separate climates. The Earth that once felt biologically connected was becoming fragmented. That fragmentation carried consequences no living creature could fully understand at the time. Some ancient ecosystems may have collapsed because mountain formation altered rainfall patterns too quickly for species to adapt. Regions that were once wet slowly dried. Other areas cooled as atmospheric circulation changed. Rivers disappeared, forests retreated. Entire forms of life faced environments unlike those their ancestors evolved within. Yet destruction was only part of the story. New climates also created new opportunities. Isolated regions encouraged different forms of life to emerge separately. Species adapted to colder highlands, wetter valleys, and dry interior landscapes. Evolution accelerated within divided environments shaped by the growing complexity of the planet itself, all because stone rose slowly toward the sky. That may be one of the strangest realities hidden within Earth's history. Mountains appear silent and unmoving, yet they may have transformed the atmosphere more dramatically than many volcanic eruptions or storms. They reshaped how the planet distributed heat, moisture, and life without ever moving quickly enough for living creatures to recognize the scale of change unfolding around them. And the process was never carefully planned. The climates humans now call natural may simply be consequences of ancient geological collisions that happened long before forests, animals, or civilizations existed. The modern world may not represent balance or design at all, but the accidental outcome of continents crashing together across deep time. Because once mountains rose high enough to influence the sky, the Earth itself began behaving like a different planet entirely, and life would never evolve the same way again. As mountains continued rising across the Earth, the planet began changing in a quieter and more intimate way, not only through climate, not only through rivers or storms, but through life itself. Before towering ranges divided the continents, many ecosystems remained loosely connected across enormous distances. Species moved more freely through broad landscapes, where environmental boundaries were softer and less extreme. The world still contained differences, but fewer obstacles prevented life from spreading across open terrain. Mountains changed that balance completely. The moment high elevations expanded across continents, the Earth began separating life into isolated worlds. Cold peaks blocked migration routes that once connected distant regions. Deep valleys trapped moisture and created hidden climates unlike the environments surrounding them. Rain fell heavily on one side of mountain ranges, while dry conditions emerged on the other. Rivers carved new pathways through stone, dividing habitats even further, and slowly life became fragmented. Populations that once interacted regularly found themselves separated by landscapes too difficult to cross. Over immense spans of time, animals trapped within different regions adapted independently to their changing surroundings. Plants evolved new survival strategies beneath colder temperatures, thinner air, stronger winds, or isolated rainfall patterns. The same planet began producing entirely different living worlds side by side. A forest on one side of a mountain range could evolve separately from another forest, only a relatively short distance away. Creatures exposed to different climates changed gradually through survival pressure and isolation. Some species disappeared entirely when environments shifted too quickly. Others adapted in strange and unexpected directions. The Earth became more biologically complex because it became more divided. That may be one of the hidden paradoxes inside the history of mountains. They created diversity through separation. The landscapes humans now consider beautiful or natural often emerged because geography isolated life long enough for evolution to experiment in different directions. Mountains did not simply decorate ecosystems after they formed. They actively shaped the conditions that allowed many ecosystems to exist at all. Even humanity may ultimately owe part of its existence to those ancient divisions. The climates, migrations, and evolutionary pressures that shaped countless species unfolded inside a world already transformed by rising terrain. Mountains redirected rivers that supported future ecosystems. They created isolated regions where life evolved differently across millions of years. They reshaped weather systems that influenced survival itself. The Earth humans inherited was built from fragmentation, and yet the process remained almost invisible while it happened. No living creature could watch mountains rising fast enough to understand what they were becoming. Generations after generation adapted to subtle environmental changes without seeing the deeper geological forces reshaping the world around them. Forests shifted. Rainfall changed. Temperatures cooled in high elevations. Migration paths slowly disappeared beneath stone and ice. Life adjusted because it had no other choice, and above it all, the mountains continued growing. The ancient horizon of the Earth was no longer empty. Across continents, enormous ridges now stood against the sky, where flat landscapes once stretched uninterrupted into the distance. Snow gathered on some peaks. Storms wrapped around elevated terrain. Rivers descended from highlands into valleys far below. The planet that began as a restless open world was slowly transforming into something more structured, more divided, and strangely more familiar. The modern Earth was beginning to emerge. But beneath that familiarity remains a disturbing realization. If mountains once changed climate, oceans, rainfall, ecosystems, and evolution itself, then perhaps they never stopped influencing the destiny of life. Even now, they continue shaping where water flows, where forests grow, where storms gather, and where civilizations survive. The planet is still being guided by landscapes formed through ancient collisions long before humans appeared. And in ways most people never notice, those silent structures of stone may still be shaping humanity's future at this very moment. Because mountains were never simply part of the scenery. They became forces that divided the earth into countless living worlds, each evolving beneath a different sky. When mountains first began rising across the continents, they changed more than the sky. They changed the behavior of water itself. Before elevated landscapes dominated the earth, rainfall often spread slowly across broad lowlands without clear direction. Water gathered in shallow regions, drifted through wetlands, or disappeared into open plains where the land offered little resistance. Rivers existed, but many lacked the speed and force that would later reshape entire continents. The world was wetter then, but less organized. Mountains transformed that balance the moment gravity began pulling water down steep slopes. Rain no longer wandered aimlessly across flat terrain. It accelerated downward through narrow channels cut into rising stone. Tiny streams formed along cold highlands and merged into larger currents carrying enormous energy across the surface of the earth. Valleys deepened. Sediments loosened from mountainsides and traveled outward through flowing water. And slowly, rivers became architects of the planet. The process unfolded so gradually that no living creature could witness its full scale. A small stream carved rock grain by grain. Floods widened channels over thousands of years. Sediment gathered across distant lowlands. What began as narrow flows descending from mountains eventually became enormous river systems stretching across continents toward the sea. The earth entered an age of movement. Not sudden movement, but endless circulation. Water rose into the sky as vapor, returned as rain against elevated terrain, descended through rivers, and carried pieces of mountains back toward the oceans. The continents themselves began dissolving slowly into the sea. Even now, that process continues. Every river on Earth is carrying fragments of mountains within it. The mud suspended in flowing water, the minerals feeding fertile valleys, the sediments settling along coastlines. Much of it began high above sea level where rain and ice slowly weakened stone before gravity carried the remains downward. This changes the meaning of rivers completely. They are not simply bodies of water moving through landscapes. They are systems transporting entire mountains grain by grain across geological time. Valleys, floodplains, and fertile regions emerged because elevated terrain continuously sacrificed itself to erosion. Some of the most productive environments on Earth may only exist because mountains never stop breaking apart. The minerals released through erosion traveled enormous distances. Rivers carried nutrients from highlands into wetlands, forests, and eventually the oceans themselves. Tiny particles of rock spread through ecosystems and quietly supported life far from the mountains where they originated. And over millions of years, the consequences may have become even larger. Ancient oceans did not remain untouched by this endless flow of sediment. Rivers poured vast quantities of dissolved minerals into the seas, gradually changing ocean chemistry itself. Marine ecosystems adapted to shifting conditions created partly by mountains dissolving into water across continents. That possibility carries a strange implication. Some evolutionary leaps within Earth's oceans may have been connected indirectly to erosion occurring far inland. The rise of mountains could have altered marine environments simply by feeding the seas with enormous amounts of nutrients over geological time. The Earth behaved less like separate systems and more like a single circulating organism. Mountains influenced rivers. Rivers reshaped continents. Sediments changed oceans. Oceans supported life, and life evolved within conditions created by landscapes constantly wearing themselves away. Nothing remained truly still. Even the mountains, which appear permanent to human eyes, were already vanishing from the moment they formed. Rain weakened them. Ice fractured them. Rivers carried their remains across valleys and plains toward distant coastlines where fragments eventually settled beneath the sea. The planet humans know today was carved by that endless movement. The fertile lands supporting forests and civilizations, the deep valleys dividing continents, the winding rivers crossing immense distances, all emerged because water learned how to descend from rising terrain with power the earlier Earth never possessed. And once rivers began carrying mountains into the oceans, another transformation quietly unfolded beyond the continents themselves. The seas were changing too. The mountains did not stop changing the Earth once rivers began carving valleys through their slopes. Their influence traveled far beyond the continents themselves. Grain by grain, rivers carried pieces of rising landscapes toward the oceans. Sediment poured into coastal waters across immense spans of time, slowly transforming the chemistry of the seas. The process appeared gentle from moment to moment, almost invisible, yet over millions of years it altered environments on a planetary scale. The oceans began behaving differently. Before continents developed massive elevated regions, the seas moved through a world shaped by flatter terrain and simpler coastlines. Water circulated through wider open passages. Currents traveled along routes that would later disappear beneath shifting landmasses and rising mountains. The Earth remained connected in ways that no longer exist now. But as the surface of the planet changed, the oceans changed with it. Mountain formation reshaped continents, and reshaped continents altered the movement of the sea. Narrow ocean passages opened and closed as drifting landmasses collided and lifted upward. Coastlines changed direction. Deep currents encountered new barriers beneath the water. Slowly, the circulation of the oceans evolved into something more complex. Some seas became rich with nutrients carried by rivers descending from mountain ranges. Marine life expanded within these fertile waters where sediments and dissolved minerals fed growing ecosystems. Other regions became isolated as currents weakened or shifted away, leaving entire seas calmer, warmer, and sometimes dangerously stagnant. The oceans were not passive bodies of water. They responded constantly to changes occurring far above sea level. Even distant mountain ranges may have influenced underwater worlds thousands of miles away. Rivers connected elevated terrain directly to marine ecosystems, carrying minerals, organic material, and fragments of continents into the sea without interruption. The Earth functioned like a single circulating system. Mountains shaped rivers. Rivers fed oceans. Oceans redistributed heat and moisture across the planet, and the atmosphere responded to all of it. That final connection may be the strangest of all. As mountains rose higher, rain and weather gradually broke exposed rock apart through erosion and chemical reactions. Over immense periods of time, those reactions may have slowly removed carbon dioxide from the atmosphere itself. Tiny changes accumulated across millions of years as rainfall interacted with stone and rivers carried dissolved minerals toward the sea. The consequences may have been enormous. Some ancient cooling events in Earth's history could have been connected partly to mountain formation accelerating these slow planetary processes. The atmosphere changed. Temperatures shifted. Ice expanded across certain regions. The climate moved toward entirely different states because continents had collided and raised new terrain toward the sky. The mountains may have helped teach the Earth how to cool itself. That idea transforms them completely. They are no longer only landscapes rising above the surface of the planet. They become hidden regulators influencing oceans, weather, atmospheric chemistry, and long-term climate stability across geological time. Even underwater ecosystems that never touched land may have depended indirectly on mountains existing somewhere far beyond the horizon. And still, the cycle continues. Rain falls against elevated slopes. Rivers descend through valleys carrying fragments of stone. Sediments spread into the oceans. Minerals dissolve into seawater. The atmosphere shifts slowly through interactions too gradual for human senses to detect directly. The mountains humans admire are already disappearing. Every cliff face, every ridge, every towering peak is being worn away grain by water and weather. The same forces that allowed mountains to transform the Earth are now carrying them steadily back toward the oceans from which many of their rocks once emerged long ago. Nothing about the planet remains truly permanent. The continents rise and dissolve continuously within an endless cycle connecting sky, stone, rivers, and sea. The modern world exists only within one temporary arrangement of those systems, balanced for now between geological forces still shaping the earth beneath human civilization. And within oceans altered by mountains and rivers, life itself was beginning to change in extraordinary ways. Mountains appear silent, cold stone rising above forests, clouds, and snow. To human eyes, they often seem detached from life itself, standing beyond the movement of rivers, oceans, and living creatures. Yet beneath that stillness may hide one of the deepest connections in Earth's history. The rise of mountains may have helped prepare the conditions that allowed complex life to exist at all, not through sudden miracles, not through dramatic moments visible to the creatures living below them, but through slow exchanges unfolding across millions of years. As mountains rose into the atmosphere, weather immediately began working against them. Rain weakened exposed stone, ice fractured rock during cold seasons, rivers carried dissolved minerals away from high elevations and spread them across continents and oceans. The mountains fed the planet by slowly destroying themselves. Tiny particles of phosphorus, iron, and other minerals entered rivers continuously through erosion. Those rivers carried nutrients into coastal waters and open seas where microscopic forms of life depended upon them. Over immense periods of time, these quiet geological exchanges may have supported increasingly productive marine ecosystems across the Earth. The process never stopped. Rain fell against stone, stone broke apart. Rivers carried fragments outward, the oceans absorbed the remains, and within that endless circulation, life slowly changed. The Earth behaved less like separate systems competing against one another, and more like a connected cycle where mountains, water, atmosphere, and biology constantly exchanged material through deep time. Even the highest peaks became participants in environments far beyond their own horizons. This changes the meaning of mountains completely. They were not only obstacles shaping climate and geography, they may also have acted as distant providers supporting ecosystems that never touched the mountains directly. Ancient oceans rich with nutrients could sustain larger and more complex biological systems because continents continuously delivered minerals into the sea, and eventually those systems transformed the atmosphere itself. One of the strangest possibilities in Earth's history is that breathable oxygen levels may have been influenced partly by geological cycles connected to rising terrain and erosion. Productive marine life helped alter the chemistry of the atmosphere over enormous spans of time. Mountains, rivers, oceans, and biology became linked inside a process no single organism could ever fully perceive while living within it. The air humans breathe today may carry traces of those ancient exchanges. That realization feels almost impossible at first. The peaks standing silent above modern landscapes suddenly become part of a story far larger than scenery or geology alone. They helped shape rivers. Rivers fed oceans. Oceans supported evolving life. Life transformed the atmosphere. And eventually, forests, animals, and civilizations emerged within conditions built slowly through those interconnected systems. The Earth was preparing itself long before humans arrived. There is something strangely beautiful about imagining ancient mountains dissolving gradually into rivers beneath forgotten skies, while life quietly grows more complex below. The process unfolded without intention, without awareness, and without pause. Stone became sediment, sediment became nutrients. Nutrients became part of living systems that slowly changed the future of the planet. And yet, the same mountains that nurtured life also carried danger within them. The rise of elevated terrain created instability alongside opportunity. Climates shifted. Ecosystems became isolated. Some regions dried while others flooded. Species adapted in separated environments, while other species disappeared entirely when conditions changed too quickly. Mountains gave life complexity through division as much as through support. That tension would shape the future of Earth again and again. Because the forces that created fertile rivers, stable climates, and evolving ecosystems also fragmented the planet into isolated worlds where survival became uncertain. The same landscapes that fed oceans and transformed the atmosphere introduced barriers, extinctions, and environmental instability that life could never fully escape. The Earth humans inherited was not built through balance alone. It emerged through pressure, separation, destruction, and adaptation unfolding across unimaginable spans of time. And as mountains continued rising higher across the planet, those consequences were only beginning. As mountains continued spreading across the Earth, the planet slowly lost something it once possessed: connection. The earlier world, though unstable and restless, remained more open. Winds traveled farther, rivers crossed broader landscapes, ecosystems blended across immense regions without towering barriers forcing life apart. The continents still held differences, but much of the planet remained loosely connected through climate, migration, and movement. Then the mountains rose higher, and Earth began dividing itself into separate worlds. The transformation happened gradually enough that no living creature could recognize its full scale while it unfolded. A forest growing beside a rising mountain range experienced subtle changes first. Rain gathered more heavily against elevated slopes. Temperatures shifted. Rivers carved deeper valleys. The land became harder to cross with each passing age. Eventually, environments that once touched each other became isolated completely. One side of a mountain range might receive endless rainfall beneath thick clouds, while dry plains expanded beneath clear skies on the other side. Wet forests adapted to constant moisture while grasslands or deserts emerged only a relatively short distance away. The same continent now contained climates so different they felt like separate planets, and life changed with them. Animals that once shared open territory became trapped within isolated regions for millions of years. Plants adapted independently beneath different temperatures, rainfall patterns, and elevations. Entire ecosystems evolved side by side without ever reconnecting again. The Earth was becoming fragmented. At first, that fragmentation may seem destructive. Mountains prevented movement. They separated habitats. They trapped populations behind cold ridges, steep valleys, and difficult terrain. But hidden inside that separation was something unexpected. Isolation itself became a creative force. When life is divided long enough, it begins changing in different directions. Species adapt to local conditions independently from one another. Small differences accumulate across immense spans of time until forests, animals, and ecosystems that once shared common origins become entirely distinct. Some of Earth's greatest biodiversity may only exist because mountains quietly forced life apart. The modern world is filled with environments shaped by that ancient division. Rainforests hidden within isolated valleys. Unique species surviving only within distant highlands. Entire ecosystems separated from one another by terrain that slowly transformed the destiny of life over geological time. And the influence of mountains extended beyond biology alone. Weather systems became trapped and redirected by elevated landscapes. Rivers followed different routes. Migration patterns shifted. Even in the far future, human cultures would develop separately because mountain barriers slowed contact between regions for centuries. Stone-shaped destiny without intention. The Earth that once behaved like one connected living system now resembled countless isolated realities evolving beside one another beneath different. Some regions became colder, others wetter, others nearly unreachable. The same planet contained environments so separated by geography that life followed entirely different evolutionary paths within them. There is something beautiful about that complexity, but there is also something melancholy hidden within it. As mountains created diversity, they also created distance. The world became richer, yet more divided. Ecosystems flourished separately while losing connection to one another. The rise of complexity carried loneliness within it. The Earth humans know today emerged from that fragmentation. Every isolated forest, every hidden valley, every species found nowhere else on the planet may carry traces of ancient geological separation deep within its history. Mountains became walls dividing climates, migration routes, and eventually civilizations themselves. And once life became trapped inside separated worlds, survival itself grew more uncertain, because isolation does not only create opportunity, it also creates pressure. As climates shifted and environments changed around these divided ecosystems, many species would face conditions they could not survive. The same mountains that encouraged diversity would also intensify extinction, forcing life to adapt faster than ever before. Mountains created new worlds, but they also erased old ones. As rising landscapes divided the Earth into isolated climates and separated ecosystems, life faced a challenge more dangerous than sudden violence. The threat did not arrive in a single catastrophic moment. There was no instant destruction visible across the horizon. No single day when the planet changed completely. Instead, the Earth became slowly unfamiliar. Rain began falling in different places. Rivers shifted course across valleys that had once remained fertile for ages. Forests retreated as colder or drier conditions spread into regions where older ecosystems could no longer survive. Grasslands expanded where dense vegetation once covered the land. Oceans cooled gradually as climate systems evolved around growing mountain ranges, and many species could not adapt quickly enough. The mountains rarely destroyed life directly. Their influence was quieter than that. They altered the conditions surrounding survival itself. An animal adapted to warm forests might slowly lose its habitat as rainfall patterns changed over thousands of years. A population separated by elevated terrain could no longer migrate toward more stable environments during climate shifts. Rivers that once fed wetlands disappeared into new channels carved through stone. Food sources declined, temperatures changed, reproduction became more difficult, and eventually, some forms of life simply vanished. The process often unfolded so slowly that no creature could fully understand what was happening around it. Generation after generation experienced only small environmental differences from the world before. Slightly colder seasons, longer dry periods, fewer forests, different migration routes. But over immense spans of time, those changes became overwhelming. The Earth transformed silently while life struggled to keep pace. That silence makes ancient extinction feel strangely unsettling. Modern imagination often associates extinction with dramatic disasters. Massive impacts, volcanic explosions, sudden destruction visible across the sky. Yet many species may have disappeared through something far less dramatic and perhaps more frightening. Slow change. The planet does not require violence to reshape life. It only needs enough time. A mountain range rising gradually across a continent could alter rainfall patterns for millions of years. Entire ecosystems might collapse simply because environments became unfamiliar faster than species could evolve. Life adapted continuously, but adaptation always carried limits. And yet, hidden within that destruction was another process unfolding at the same time: innovation. While some species disappeared, others evolved rapidly inside newly isolated environments created by mountains. Separation forced life into unfamiliar conditions where survival demanded change. Different climates encouraged different adaptations. Populations trapped apart from one another slowly became something new. The same geological forces causing extinction were also increasing complexity across the Earth. That contradiction sits at the center of the planet's history. Mountains created beauty and instability together. They divided ecosystems while generating diversity. They transformed climates in ways that destroyed ancient environments while allowing entirely new forms of life to emerge afterward. The Earth became richer through pressure. There is something deeply uneasy about that realization. The natural world humans admire today may only exist because countless older worlds disappeared first. Every thriving ecosystem carries traces of extinction buried somewhere beneath its history. The forests, animals, and climates familiar now emerged from cycles of loss and adaptation unfolding over geological time. And the process never truly ended. Even today, mountains continue influencing rainfall, temperature, rivers, and ecosystems across the globe. The same forces that reshaped ancient life still move beneath the surface of the Earth, slowly altering the conditions upon which survival depends. Modern civilization exists within that ongoing instability, whether humans notice it or not. The balance of the present world feels permanent only because change often unfolds too slowly for a single lifetime to perceive clearly. But the mountains are still rising in some places. Rivers are still moving. Climates are still shifting. The Earth remains unfinished. And within that changing world, future ancestors of humanity would eventually emerge, shaped by landscapes already transformed by millions of years of geological division, pressure, and adaptation. Long before the first human walked across the Earth, the planet was already preparing the world humanity would one day inherit. The process began millions of years before cities, language, or memory. Mountains rose slowly across continents, while rivers descended through fresh valleys carrying minerals into fertile lowlands. Rainfall patterns stabilized around elevated terrain, seasons strengthened. Forests expanded beside reliable water systems fed by distant snow and rain gathering high above the plains. The Earth was constructing environments future civilizations would depend upon long before civilization itself existed. At first, these changes had nothing to do with humans. They were simply consequences of geology, climate, and time interacting across immense spans of history. Yet the landscapes created by mountains slowly transformed the surface of the planet into something increasingly capable of supporting complex ecosystems and eventually large populations of intelligent life. The rivers became especially important. Water descending from highlands carried nutrients across valleys and plains, where soils grew rich enough to sustain dense plant life. Seasonal flooding spread minerals across wide regions again and again over thousands of years. Wetlands formed. Forests expanded. Stable ecosystems emerged beside rivers that never would have existed without elevated terrain continuously feeding them from above. Much later, human civilizations would gather around those same systems. Some of the most fertile regions in Earth's history were shaped quietly by mountains long before any human ever saw them. Ancient agricultural societies eventually appeared beside rivers connected to distant highlands through cycles of rain, snow, erosion, and sediment that had already operated for millions of years. The landscapes themselves were ancient preparations. Mountains also changed climate in ways that future humanity would rely upon without fully understanding. Elevated terrain helped organize rainfall into more predictable patterns. Some regions received regular seasonal moisture while others remained dry. Snow accumulated in colder highlands and melted gradually during warmer periods, feeding rivers long after storms had passed. The Earth became more structured. That structure allowed ecosystems to stabilize across certain regions long enough for larger populations of life to survive there continuously. Forests, grasslands, and fertile valleys developed within environmental systems shaped partly by geology beneath them, and mountains introduced another force that would shape humanity forever: separation. As elevated terrain divided continents into isolated regions, future populations would develop independently from one another across different climates and landscapes. Mountain barriers slowed migration, altered trade routes, and prevented easy communication between distant groups. Geography itself would eventually influence language, culture, belief, and political boundaries long before humans fully recognized how deeply terrain controlled movement. Stone quietly guided history from beneath it. This creates a strange perspective on civilization itself. Humanity often views its cities, cultures, and achievements as products of intelligence alone. But beneath every successful civilization existed environmental conditions created through geological processes far older than humanity. Reliable rivers, fertile valleys, predictable climates, protected regions capable of sustaining agriculture and stable populations. Many of those conditions emerged because mountains had already spent millions of years shaping the planet. The first civilizations did not appear randomly across the Earth. They formed within landscapes already engineered through erosion, rainfall, river systems, and climate cycles connected to elevated terrain beyond the horizon. The mountains were preparing the stage long before the actors arrived. There is something humbling about that realization. Human history feels enormous from the perspective of civilization, yet it rests upon geological foundations constructed over spans of time almost impossible to imagine. The valleys where people built cities, the rivers feeding agriculture, even the climates supporting dense populations were often consequences of ancient continental collisions no civilization ever witnessed. And still, humans often see mountains only as obstacles, barriers to cross, harsh landscapes to survive, difficult terrain standing between civilizations. Yet the modern world itself may only exist because those mountains rose in the first place. Without them, rivers would flow differently, climates would shift, fertile regions might never have formed at all. Humanity did not rise separately from geological history. It emerged inside a world mountains had already been shaping for millions upon millions of years, and the influence of those ancient landscapes was still only beginning to reveal itself. There was a time when the Earth may have felt far less predictable than the world humans know today. Storms traveled across enormous distances without clear boundaries guiding them. Rainfall shifted unpredictably across open terrain. Rivers expanded and disappeared according to unstable climates that changed slowly over geological time. The planet still possessed rhythms, but those rhythms were looser, less organized, and often more extreme. Then the mountains rose higher, and slowly the Earth began learning stability. As elevated terrain spread across continents, the atmosphere started behaving differently around it. Winds carrying moisture across the planet encountered massive stone barriers standing directly in their path. Air was forced upward along cold slopes where temperatures dropped and clouds released rain or snow. Water gathered repeatedly in the same regions. Rivers became more reliable. Climate patterns strengthened across vast stretches of land. The mountains transformed wandering weather into structured systems. Snow became especially important. In high elevations, frozen water accumulated season after season, remaining stored long after storms passed. During warmer periods, melting snow fed rivers gradually instead of releasing all moisture at once. Valleys and plains below received more consistent water supplies through cycles that repeated year after year. The Earth began developing memory. Rain returned to familiar regions. Dry seasons followed wet seasons with increasing regularity. Forests adapted to dependable climate patterns. Grasslands expanded where rainfall remained balanced enough to support them continuously. And over immense spans of time, life evolved within those repeating systems. Modern people rarely notice how deeply existence depends on that stability. Seasons feel ordinary because humans are born into them. Winter becomes spring, rainy periods arrive and fade. Rivers rise and fall according to patterns civilizations have learned to expect, but those predictable cycles may not have existed in the same way before mountains reorganized the movement of air and water across the planet. The calm rhythm of modern climate may be partly geological. Without elevated terrain redirecting winds, trapping moisture, and storing snow, some regions might have remained too unstable for long-term ecosystems to flourish consistently. Agricultural societies in the far future would eventually depend upon seasonal regularity created through environmental systems shaped partly by mountains far beyond the horizon. The connection feels almost invisible. A distant mountain range gathers snow. Months later, rivers descend into valleys where crops grow beneath warmer skies. Entire civilizations survive because water arrives at roughly the same time, year after year, through cycles established long before humans existed. Stone quietly organized the future, and the influence of mountains extended beyond rainfall alone. Elevated terrain also altered temperature distribution across continents. Cold air settled differently. Storm systems slowed or redirected themselves around major ranges. Wet environments remained concentrated in some regions while dry climates stabilized elsewhere. The Earth became more balanced through complexity. That balance was never perfect, but it allowed ecosystems to endure long enough for forests, grasslands, rivers, and eventually human civilizations to depend upon repeating environmental patterns instead of constant uncertainty. There is something strangely mysterious about that realization. The stability humans often take for granted may not be natural in the way people imagine. It may be the result of ancient geological forces shaping the atmosphere silently across millions of years. Mountains did not only create dramatic landscapes visible against the horizon, they taught the planet how to breathe in rhythms life could survive within. Glaciers began forming in colder elevations where snow survived through entire seasons. Bright ice reflected sunlight back into space, cooling surrounding regions even further. Ocean currents responded to shifting temperatures while weather patterns adjusted around expanding cold zones. The Earth was becoming increasingly interconnected, with mountains influencing systems far beyond their own slopes and valleys beyond anything life could fully perceive. At first, the mountains seemed to bring balance to the Earth. They organized rainfall, they stabilized rivers, they helped create repeating climates that allowed ecosystems to endure across enormous stretches of time. Forests expanded beside reliable water systems. Seasons became more structured. The planet appeared calmer than the restless world that existed before elevated landscapes transformed the continents. But hidden inside that stability was another possibility. The same mountains that helped regulate the atmosphere may also have pushed the Earth towards some of the coldest periods in its history. The process began quietly. As mountain ranges continued rising higher into the atmosphere, rain and snow struck exposed stone across vast regions of the planet. Water flowed through cracks in rock, and triggered slow chemical reactions that unfolded over millions of years. Tiny amounts of carbon dioxide were gradually removed from the atmosphere and carried away through rivers into the oceans below. No living creature could notice the change while it happened. Year after year, the atmosphere appeared almost identical. Storms still crossed the continents, rivers still flowed toward the sea, forests still covered valleys beneath the mountains. Yet beneath that familiar surface, the chemistry of the planet was slowly shifting, and over geological time, tiny changes become enormous ones. As carbon dioxide levels declined, the Earth began holding less heat within its atmosphere. Temperatures cooled gradually across some regions. Snow survived longer through colder seasons. Ice accumulated in elevated terrain where sunlight reflected away from bright frozen surfaces instead of warming the land below. The cooling strengthened itself. More ice reflected more sunlight. Cooler temperatures allowed additional snow to survive. Expanding frozen regions altered wind patterns and ocean circulation in ways that spread climate changes even farther across the planet. The mountains had become part of a planetary feedback system capable of reshaping the entire Earth. That possibility feels strange because the process lacked dramatic spectacle. There was no single moment when the world suddenly froze, no instant disaster visible across the horizon. Entire climate shifts unfolded slowly enough that generations of life adapted without fully understanding what was happening around them. The Earth changed silently. Some ancient ice ages may have begun in exactly that way. Mountain formation altered rainfall, atmospheric chemistry, and temperature patterns gradually until the balance of the planet shifted toward colder conditions. Oceans cooled, glaciers expanded, ecosystems migrated or disappeared as climates transformed over immense spans of time, and still the mountains continued rising. There is something deeply unsettling about realizing how delicate Earth's climate balance may always have been. A slow geological process unfolding beneath the surface of the continents could eventually cool entire oceans and reshape global ecosystems without any sudden catastrophe announcing the transformation. The modern world begins to feel less permanent through that perspective. Human civilization depends on environmental stability created through systems far older than humanity itself. Rivers, seasons, fertile landscapes, and familiar coastlines exist within balances influenced by mountains, oceans, atmospheric chemistry, and geological cycles that have operated continuously for millions of years. Those systems were shaping the climate long before humans appeared. And they never stopped. Even now, mountains influence rainfall, snowfall, river systems, temperatures, and atmospheric circulation across the planet. The same forces that contributed to ancient cooling events remain active beneath modern civilization, moving slowly enough that human lifetimes rarely perceive the scale of change directly. The Earth has never truly been under human control. Civilizations rise beneath skies already shaped by ancient geological processes unfolding silently through deep time. Mountains continue interacting with oceans and atmosphere exactly as they did long before humanity existed, guiding climates through cycles larger than memory itself. And somewhere within those ancient cycles, the future of the modern world may still be forming. The peaks standing quietly against the horizon are not relics from a finished world. They remain active participants in Earth's climate story, still shaping winds, water, ice, and survival beneath the surface of everyday human life today. It is tempting to think of mountains as relics from an ancient world, massive structures left behind by geological events long finished, silent monuments standing above forests and clouds while human civilization unfolds beneath them. They appear permanent, detached from the movement of history itself. But the mountains are not remnants of a completed Earth. They are active forces still shaping the planet at this very moment. Even now, some mountain ranges continue rising slowly toward the sky, deep beneath the Himalayas. Continents still press against one another, with immense pressure left over from collisions that began millions of years ago. The ground shifts upward centimeter by centimeter, while erosion attacks the peaks from above, through rain, rivers, wind, and ice. Creation and destruction are happening at the same time. The mountains humans admire are simultaneously growing and disappearing, and the systems connected to them remain just as active. Rivers continue carrying fragments of elevated terrain toward the oceans exactly as they did in the ancient world. Snow still gathers across high elevations before feeding valleys far below during warmer seasons. Storms redirect themselves around major ranges. Forests expand or retreat according to rainfall patterns shaped partly by terrain invisible beyond the horizon. The Earth is still responding to mountains constantly, yet modern civilization often experiences these systems only as background scenery. Rivers appear permanent, climates feel stable, mountain ranges seem motionless against the sky. Human life moves too quickly to easily perceive geological change unfolding beneath it. But the ancient processes never stopped. Water supplies supporting millions of people still depend on mountain-fed systems established across geological time. Agricultural regions continue relying on seasonal rainfall patterns organized partly by elevated terrain. Ecosystems survive within climates mountains help regulate every day. Even migration patterns can still be shaped by geography formed millions of years before humans existed. Stone continues influencing civilization quietly. There is something humbling about realizing how dependent modern life remains on landscapes humans did not create and cannot fully control. The systems supporting civilization were already operating long before the first cities appeared. Mountains gathered snow before agriculture existed. Rivers carved fertile valleys before language emerged. The atmosphere organized itself around elevated terrain while humanity still remained unimaginably far in the future. Civilization inherited a world already in motion, and the motion continues beneath it. The most unsettling part may be what happens next, because the ancient mountainless earth was never truly destroyed. It was transformed, and one day, through erosion and geological change, parts of the modern world may slowly begin returning toward flatter landscapes once again. The Himalayas will not remain forever. Neither will the Andes, the Alps, or any other range visible today. Rain will continue weakening stone. Rivers will continue carrying mountains toward the sea grain by grain. Over immense spans of time, even the tallest peaks may eventually wear down into lower terrain, while new mountains rise elsewhere through fresh continental collisions. The cycle repeats endlessly. Mountains emerge from pressure beneath the crust. They reshape rivers, climates, ecosystems, and oceans. Then they dissolve slowly back into the earth through water and time. Human civilization exists only within one brief stage of that process. The modern world feels permanent because human memory is short compared to geological history. But from the perspective of the earth itself, civilizations may appear as temporary moments unfolding between rising and falling landscapes. That realization changes the meaning of the horizon. The mountains visible today are not fixed features of reality. They are passing forms inside a planet that never truly stops rebuilding itself. The Earth humans know now is only the current version of a world continuously changing beneath oceans, skies, and civilizations alike. And long before humans understood mountains scientifically, they felt something ancient within them anyway. A sense of mystery, a sense that these towering structures carried meaning beyond stone alone. For millions of years, mountains shaped the Earth without witnesses capable of understanding them. They redirected storms, carved rivers, cooled climates, and divided ecosystems long before human beings ever stood beneath their shadows. Then, eventually, something changed. The mountains were no longer only geological forces. They became emotional ones. The first humans who encountered enormous mountain ranges did not see them as beautiful landscapes waiting to be explored. They saw walls rising beyond imagination, vast ridges disappearing into clouds, silent peaks standing above forests and storms with a scale that made human life feel painfully small. The mountains dominated the horizon like something alive. To ancient people, these places represented uncertainty more than scenery. Sudden avalanches thundered down distant slopes without warning. Strange echoes traveled across valleys at night. Storms gathered around peaks while cold winds descended into settlements below. Predators moved through mountain passes hidden beneath mist and darkness, and beyond certain ridges, the world simply vanished from human knowledge. Entire valleys remained isolated for generations because crossing some ranges seemed impossible. Small communities lived separated from one another by terrain too dangerous to travel regularly. The mountains created distance not only physically, but psychologically. They became boundaries between the known and the unknown. That unknown carried power. Human beings naturally search for meaning inside landscapes larger than themselves. The height of mountains made them feel closer to the sky than ordinary land. Their silence created unease. Their permanence contrasted sharply with fragile human existence, where storms, hunger, disease, and death constantly threatened survival. The peaks seemed eternal while human life felt temporary, and slowly, mountains entered human imagination. Across different civilizations separated by oceans and centuries, remarkably similar patterns began appearing. High places became associated with gods, spirits, ancestors, hidden wisdom, and supernatural forces. Some mountains were treated as sacred. Others were feared as dangerous thresholds where ordinary rules no longer applied. The similarity is striking because many of these cultures developed independently from one another. Again and again, human beings looked toward mountains and imagined something waiting beyond normal life. Perhaps that reaction was never accidental. Mountains may not only have shaped civilization physically through rivers and climate, they may also have influenced human psychology itself. Isolation created mystery. Dangerous terrain encouraged ritual and caution. Vast scales forced early people to confront something larger and older than themselves. The mountains changed the human mind by changing human perspective. There is something deeply immersive about imagining those early encounters. A small group of humans standing beside firelight beneath enormous dark peaks they cannot climb, hearing distant winds moving across unseen ridges somewhere above the clouds. No maps, no scientific explanations, only silence, weather, fear, and imagination filling the unknown spaces beyond the horizon. The world must have felt infinite. Even today, mountains still carry emotional power despite centuries of exploration and science. Their presence changes human behavior instinctively. People speak more quietly within high places. They experience awe, isolation, humility, even spiritual reflection, while standing beneath towering landscapes. Ancient humans likely felt those emotions far more intensely. The mountains were not background scenery to them. They were living boundaries at the edge of reality itself. And yet, over time, fear slowly transformed into something else. Human communities learned how to survive beside mountain systems instead of simply avoiding them. Rivers descending from highlands provided water. Valleys sheltered growing populations. Trade routes gradually formed through difficult passes once considered unreachable. The same landscapes once feared as barriers would eventually help support the rise of civilizations themselves. Over time, human fear of mountains slowly changed into dependence. The peaks themselves remained dangerous. Storms still gathered around them. Snow buried high passes for entire seasons. Avalanches and freezing winds reminded ancient people that elevated terrain could become deadly without warning. Yet below those harsh slopes, something extraordinary was happening. The mountains were creating places where civilization could survive. Water descending from distant highlands spread across valleys and plains in repeating seasonal cycles. Snow accumulated through colder months and melted gradually as temperatures rose, feeding rivers long after rainstorms had passed. Floodplains received fresh layers of mineral-rich soil carried from mountains far beyond the horizon. The earth itself was quietly preparing fertile ground. Ancient people may not have understood the geological systems behind this stability, but they understood the results. Crops grew reliably beside rivers fed by mountain snowmelt. Valleys sheltered settlements from harsh winds and extreme weather. Reliable water allowed larger populations to remain in one place instead of constantly moving in search of survival. And slowly, villages became cities. Some of humanity's earliest civilizations emerged within landscapes shaped directly by elevated terrain. Rivers carried nutrients from mountains into agricultural regions where dense populations could sustain themselves generation after generation. Predictable seasons encouraged long-term planning. Food surpluses supported trade, writing, architecture, and organized society. The mountains stood silently behind it all. Even civilizations far from visible peaks often depended on systems connected to distant highlands through rivers and climate patterns operating beyond human awareness. Water traveled across enormous distances before reaching the fields where crops sustained growing populations. Stone fed civilization indirectly. That connection changes the meaning of human history in subtle ways. People often imagine civilization as the triumph of intelligence over nature. Cities rise, agriculture spreads, trade routes expand. Human beings appear to shape the world through ambition and invention alone. Yet beneath those achievements existed environmental conditions created long before humanity understood them. The rivers supporting civilization were ancient. The fertile valleys were ancient. The climate systems stabilizing agriculture were ancient. Many of humanity's greatest successes may only have existed because mountains had already spent millions of years organizing rainfall, storing water, shaping rivers, and enriching soil through erosion. Civilization emerged inside a landscape already engineered by geological time, and the influence of mountains extended beyond survival itself. As elevated terrain divided populations across continents, human cultures began developing separately from one another for centuries or even millennia. Mountain barriers slowed migration and communication between regions. Languages evolved independently. Traditions changed according to local climates and isolated environments. The shape of the land influenced the shape of human identity. Political borders in the far future would often follow mountain ranges because the terrain naturally separated populations long before formal nations existed. Trade routes formed through narrow passes where geography controlled movement. Entire cultures remained isolated within valleys protected by difficult terrain surrounding them on all sides. Mountains quietly shaped the map of civilization before civilization understood the map itself. There is something deeply humbling about that realization. Human history begins feeling less separate from nature and more like a temporary adaptation within systems already unfolding for millions of years. The cities, cultures, and societies humans created did not emerge upon a neutral planet. They emerged within landscapes carefully shaped through geological forces ancient people could never fully perceive. The Earth prepared conditions for civilization long before humans arrived. And yet, the mountains carried another side to that protection. The same terrain shielding valleys from invasion and stabilizing water supplies also limited expansion and contact with the wider world. Entire communities remained isolated behind dangerous passes. Trade became difficult during winter. Some regions disappeared into mystery because geography made travel nearly impossible. The mountains protected civilizations, but they also trapped them. Beyond certain ridges, unknown valleys and forgotten worlds still waited beneath clouds and silence, hidden from human knowledge for generations at a time. For most of human history, mountains did not unite civilizations. They separated them. A single mountain range could divide entire populations so completely that people living only a short distance apart might never meet for generations. Valleys hidden behind snow-covered passes developed their own languages, beliefs, traditions, and ways of surviving. While the wider world continued changing somewhere beyond the peaks, the mountains created isolated realities, and inside those isolated worlds, time often moved differently. Some villages remained untouched by outside influence for centuries because dangerous terrain made travel nearly impossible. Trade routes vanished beneath winter snow. Narrow passes collapsed during storms or avalanches. Travelers attempting to cross unfamiliar ranges sometimes disappeared without explanation, swallowed by cold, altitude, and silence. Beyond certain ridges, knowledge simply ended. Ancient people often understood the world only as far as they could safely travel. What existed beyond the mountains became uncertain territory shaped by rumor, imagination, and fear. Distant valleys turned into places of legend where strange customs, hidden kingdoms, or supernatural forces were believed to exist beyond ordinary human reach. The mountains became walls surrounding mystery itself. There is something deeply dreamlike about imagining those forgotten regions. Small communities surviving beneath enormous peaks while storms move across unseen ridges overhead. Fires glowing faintly inside valleys isolated from the outside world. Languages spoken nowhere else on Earth. Traditions preserved because geography prevented outside contact long enough for older ways of life to survive. The mountains protected fragments of humanity from disappearance. That protection may have shaped human diversity more profoundly than most people realize. Isolation slowed cultural exchange across entire continents. Beliefs evolved independently. Rituals remained unchanged while neighboring societies transformed completely. Songs, myths, and survival techniques passed through generations without interruption because mountain barriers kept outside influence away. In some places, The past survived simply because the mountains refused to let the future arrive too quickly. The same geography that trapped communities also preserved them. Entire forms of knowledge may have survived only because mountain isolation protected them from conquest, migration, or cultural replacement. Ancient traditions lost elsewhere continued hidden within valleys difficult to reach. Human diversity expanded through separation, exactly as biological diversity once had millions of years earlier. The mountains shaped civilization the same way they shaped ecosystems, by dividing the world apart. And over time, those divisions changed human perception itself. People living beside enormous mountain systems often saw the peaks not only as physical barriers but as boundaries between realities. Beyond them existed uncertainty, new languages, unknown dangers, different gods, different laws, different versions of life. The earth felt larger because mountains made it feel unreachable. Even today, echoes of that ancient psychology remain. Remote mountain regions still carry emotional associations with mystery, isolation, hidden cultures, and forgotten time. Modern roads and technology have reduced some of the distance, yet mountains continue creating separation in subtle ways the modern world rarely notices. The silence of those landscapes still changes human emotion, and perhaps that is because mountains preserve something older than civilization itself. They remind people that the world was once vast enough for entire human realities to exist side by side without contact, vast enough for cultures to disappear into valleys hidden beyond clouds and snow, while neighboring societies never knew they existed. The modern world feels connected now, but for most of history, mountains ensured it was not. And eventually, humanity began challenging those barriers directly. Curiosity slowly replaced fear. Traders searched for safer routes through dangerous passes. Explorers attempted crossings once believed impossible. Civilizations pushed farther into elevated terrain, hoping to reach the unknown worlds hidden beyond it. The relationship between humans and mountains began changing. What had once represented the edge of reality slowly became something else, an obstacle waiting to be crossed. But crossing the mountains would transform civilization forever. Because the moment humanity learned how to move through these ancient barriers, isolated worlds that had remained separate for centuries would finally begin colliding with one another beneath the same sky. For thousands of years, mountains stood between civilizations like enormous walls built by the earth itself. Most people lived beside them, beneath them, or around them. Very few attempted to move directly through them. The risks were too great. Snow buried narrow passes without warning. Thin air weakened travelers unaccustomed to high elevations. Sudden storms erased paths that had existed only hours before. Entire groups vanished into valleys and were never seen again. The mountains resisted movement, yet eventually human curiosity became stronger than fear. Small groups of traders began searching for routes through elevated terrain where survival itself seemed uncertain. Explorers followed rivers upward toward hidden passes. Messengers crossed dangerous ridges carrying information between distant settlements. Armies attempted journeys through mountain systems that appeared almost impossible to survive. These were not adventures in the modern sense. There were no accurate maps, no reliable forecasts, no guarantee that food or shelter existed beyond the next ridge. Travelers moved slowly across unstable paths where one mistake could mean death from falling stone, freezing temperatures, starvation, or exhaustion. And still, people kept trying. The mountains had separated humanity for centuries, but they also created something else, curiosity about what existed beyond them. That curiosity changed history. The first successful crossings connected worlds that had remained isolated from one another for generations. Trade routes formed through narrow passes hidden between towering peaks. Languages spread into unfamiliar valleys. Religious beliefs traveled across mountain systems alongside merchants, travelers, and wandering communities. Ideas began moving where only silence existed before. The earth itself seemed to shrink. Regions once imagined through myth and rumor slowly became reachable realities. Civilizations discovered different technologies, customs, foods, and knowledge preserved behind mountain barriers for centuries. The mountains still divided the world physically, but now humans had begun creating pathways through them. And those pathways transformed entire eras of history. Some of humanity's most important cultural exchanges only became possible because people slowly learned how to survive within mountain systems instead of avoiding them completely. Trade connected distant societies through dangerous high-altitude routes. Knowledge spread between civilizations once separated by geography. Even diseases traveled across passes linking populations that had previously remained isolated from one another. The mountains became gateways as much as barriers. Yet despite these changes, human vulnerability remained obvious. A single storm could still destroy an expedition. Entire armies crossing elevated terrain sometimes lost more people to cold and exhaustion than to battle itself. Narrow trails collapsed beneath travelers carrying goods between civilizations. Altitude weakened bodies unfamiliar with thin mountain air. The landscape never became fully safe. Nature continued controlling the terms of survival. There is something humbling about imagining early travelers moving through those enormous environments. Tiny groups crossing ridges beneath endless skies, while snow and stones surrounded them on every side. Human ambition expanded farther than before, yet the scale of the mountains still made civilizations appear fragile and temporary by comparison. Even the greatest empires remained small beneath the peaks, and perhaps that balance never truly changed. Humanity often describes these journeys as conquering mountains, but the reality may have been different. The mountains allowed passage only under certain conditions. They determined where roads could exist. They controlled water, weather, temperature, and movement. Civilizations adapted themselves around terrain rather than truly mastering it. Stone still shaped human destiny from above. But as people crossed mountains more frequently, another transformation quietly began unfolding. Curiosity no longer focused only on what existed beyond the peaks. Humans started questioning the mountains themselves. Where did these enormous landscapes come from? Why did seashells sometimes appear high above sea level? Why did the earth seem to rise and fold in ways ancient myths could not fully explain? The mountains were no longer only barriers or sacred places. They were becoming mysteries waiting to be understood. For most of human history, mountains appeared eternal. They towered above civilizations unchanged while empires rose and collapsed beneath them. Generations were born, lived, and disappeared while the peaks remained fixed against the horizon exactly as before. To ancient people, mountains seemed closer to permanence than anything else on Earth. Then humanity began noticing strange details hidden inside the stone. Fossils of sea creatures appeared high above sea level where no ocean existed. Shells rested within rocks thousands of meters above modern coastlines. Layers of stone folded across mountain faces in shapes resembling fabric bent under pressure instead of solid ground formed peacefully over time. Something about the mountains no longer made sense. At first, these discoveries felt almost impossible to explain. If mountains had always stood where they were now, how could traces of ancient seas exist near their summits? Why did some rock layers appear crushed, twisted, and lifted upward as though the earth itself had once moved violently beneath them? Slowly, observation after observation began changing humanity's understanding of the planet. The mountains were not timeless. They were moving, not quickly enough for human eyes to witness directly, but continuously across geological time. Entire regions now standing high above the clouds once rested beneath ancient oceans. The continents themselves drifted across the surface of the earth. Massive sections of crust glided, folded, and lifted upward over millions of years. The planet beneath civilization was alive. That realization transformed mountains completely. They were no longer symbols of stillness or permanence. They became evidence of motion so enormous and so slow that human beings could only detect it by studying traces left behind across immense spans of time. Seas became mountains. Mountains eroded into rivers. Rivers carried continents back toward the oceans. The earth reshaped itself endlessly, and the mountains revealed it. There is something deeply unsettling about understanding that the ground beneath human civilization is not fixed in the way people instinctively imagine. Continents drift. The crust bends. Landscapes rise and disappear. The world humans experience as stable exists within a process still unfolding beneath it. The mountains only appeared permanent because human lives are brief. Compared to geological time, entire civilizations pass almost instantly. Human history feels enormous from within itself, yet mountains experience it like passing weather. While people built cities, fought wars, and created religions, The peaks continued rising and eroding silently in the background, exactly as they had for millions of years before humanity existed. Even now, the process continues. Some mountain ranges are still rising higher through collisions deep beneath the surface of the Earth. Others are slowly wearing away beneath rain, rivers, glaciers, and wind. The destruction of mountains begins the moment they form. Erosion attacks every exposed cliff and ridge continuously, carrying fragments of elevated terrain grain by grain back toward the oceans. The tallest peaks on Earth are already disappearing. That idea changes the emotional meaning of mountains entirely. Instead of representing permanence, they become symbols of constant transformation. Their silence hides motion. Their strength hides fragility. Their immense age hides the reality that they too exist only temporarily within the long history of the Earth, and humanity exists within that same cycle. The realization creates a strange perspective on civilization itself. Cities, cultures, and nations often imagine themselves as lasting achievements. Yet the landscapes surrounding them are already changing beneath their foundations through forces operating far beyond ordinary human awareness. The Earth never truly became stable. It only moves slowly enough for people to mistake movement for stillness. And once humanity understood mountains as living parts of a planetary cycle rather than fixed monuments, another unsettling thought emerged. If continents, climates, rivers, and landscapes are all still changing, then the future of civilization may never be as secure as humans once believed, because the Earth beneath humanity is not finished shaping itself yet. Human beings often imagine the Earth as complete. The continents appear fixed. Mountains stand against the horizon with an ancient stillness that feels permanent. Rivers follow familiar paths generation after generation, while cities rise beside them. Civilization builds roads, borders, and monuments as though the surface of the planet itself has finally settled into its final form. But the Earth never stopped changing. Even now, mountains continue rising beneath the pressure of drifting continents. Earthquakes reshape valleys in moments of sudden violence. Rivers carve deeper into stone year after year while coastlines slowly shift beneath tides and erosion. The planet beneath modern civilization remains restless, unfinished, and continuously transforming. The process simply unfolds too slowly for most people to notice. A mountain may rise only a few millimeters in a year. A coastline may retreat so gradually that several generations pass before the change becomes obvious. Entire rivers can alter their paths across centuries while human history records only fragments of the transformation. Yet geological time never pauses. The Himalayas are still climbing toward the sky. Other ranges are already collapsing beneath weather and gravity. Sediment carried by rivers continues traveling toward the oceans where it settles across ancient seafloors that may someday rise into mountains themselves. The Earth behaves less like a stable object and more like an endless process. That perspective changes the emotional meaning of civilization itself. Modern society often treats nature as background scenery surrounding human activity. Mountains become landmarks. Rivers become resources, coastlines become borders. Yet beneath those familiar systems are geological forces operating on timescales vastly larger than human memory. Entire populations depend upon conditions that may only exist temporarily. Cities survive because rivers still flow from mountain-fed systems established millions of years ago. Agricultural regions rely on climate patterns shaped partly by terrain still changing beneath the surface. Some communities remain protected by landscapes that earthquakes or erosion may eventually alter completely. Human civilization exists inside moving systems, and future civilizations may inherit a planet physically different from the one humans know now. Mountains will continue rising where flat terrain once existed. Existing peaks may slowly erode into lower landscapes across immense spans of time. Oceans will advance and retreat against changing coastlines. Rivers will carve new valleys while abandoning older ones. Regions now fertile may eventually dry. Regions now frozen may warm beneath shifting climate systems. The Earth of the future will not resemble the present forever. There is something strangely peaceful and unsettling about that realization at the same time. Human beings often search for permanence because permanence feels safe. Yet the planet itself offers no final stillness. Every landscape visible today exists within cycles of creation and destruction unfolding continuously across deep time. The mountains understand this better than anything else on Earth. They rise from pressure beneath the crust. They shape climates, ecosystems, rivers, and civilizations. Then they collapse slowly back into oceans through erosion and time. Their existence is temporary even when it appears eternal to human eyes, and humanity lives within only one brief stage of that cycle. The modern world may feel ancient from the perspective of civilization, but from the perspective of geology, it is only a passing arrangement of continents, climates, and landscapes still moving toward futures no human will ever witness completely. The Earth was never finished. Perhaps it never will be. There is no final version of the planet waiting somewhere ahead. Only endless transformation continuing beneath oceans, mountains, forests, and cities regardless of whether human beings exist to observe it. And if mountains themselves are temporary, then another question begins quietly emerging from the silence of geological time. What happens when they disappear? Because the ancient flat world that existed before mountains may not belong only to the distant past. One day, after enough erosion and enough time, the Earth could begin returning toward unfamiliar horizons once again. Mountains appear immortal. They stand above storms and forests with a silence that feels older than memory itself. Civilizations rise beneath them, disappear, and are forgotten while the peaks remain watching over the horizon exactly as before. To human eyes, mountains seem permanent because human history moves far too quickly to witness their decline. But the mountains are already dying. Their destruction began the moment they formed. Every storm weakens them. Every river carries pieces of them away. Ice fractures expose stone during cold seasons while gravity slowly pulls entire slopes downward over immense spans of time. Wind strips tiny particles from cliffs invisible to human senses. Water enters cracks and expands as temperatures freeze and thaw again and again. The Earth never stops eroding its own creations. At first, the process feels impossible to imagine. The Himalayas rise thousands of meters into the atmosphere. The Andes stretch across continents. The Alps appear solid and eternal beneath snow and cloud. Yet even these enormous landscapes are fragile when measured against geological time. The tallest mountains on Earth are disappearing grain by grain. Rivers descending from elevated terrain carry fragments of entire mountain systems toward the sea continuously. Sediments settle across ocean floors where they may remain buried for millions of years before future geological forces raise them skyward once again. The cycle repeats endlessly. Mountains rise. Mountains dissolve. The Earth rebuilds itself from the remains. Some ancient mountain ranges have already vanished almost completely from the surface of the planet. Regions that once towered like modern peaks now survive only as worn hills, folded stone, or hidden geological traces buried beneath forests and plains. Their existence can only be reconstructed through fragments left behind inside rock layers and eroded landscapes. The world has forgotten entire mountains before. That realization changes the emotional meaning of the horizon. The peaks humans admire today are not permanent landmarks of reality. They are temporary shapes inside a planetary process continuing across billions of years. Even the mightiest ranges exist only briefly from the perspective of geological history. The Earth slowly removes everything it creates. There is something deeply melancholic about imagining a distant future where modern mountain systems no longer exist. The Himalayas flattened into lower terrain. Snow disappearing from elevations worn down by erosion. Rivers flowing through landscapes once dominated by towering peaks, now reduced to rolling hills beneath unfamiliar skies. The modern world itself begins feeling temporary, and perhaps the strangest possibility of all is that the Earth may eventually return toward landscapes resembling its ancient flatter past. Not permanently, because geological cycles never truly stop, but as part of a repeating planetary rhythm unfolding across incomprehensible spans of time. The ancient mountainless world may not belong only to the beginning of Earth's story. It may also belong to its future. That idea carries a quiet existential weight. Mountains have shaped climate, rivers, ecosystems, civilizations, and human imagination for millions of years. Entire systems supporting modern life depend upon elevated terrain still gathering snow, feeding rivers, and organizing weather across continents. But if mountains continue disappearing, those systems must eventually change too. The rivers humans depend on today may flow differently in the distant future. Climates organized around elevated terrain may shift once peaks decline enough to alter rainfall patterns and atmospheric circulation. Ecosystems adapted to high elevations may vanish as landscapes flatten and temperatures change. Nothing about the Earth remains fixed forever. The mountains only created the illusion of permanence because they changed more slowly than human civilizations could observe directly. Yet beneath that illusion, the planet has always been moving toward new forms, new climates, and new landscapes waiting far beyond human history. And as the peaks slowly vanish beneath erosion and time, another transformation quietly approaches. Because when mountains disappear, the world itself begins changing once again. If mountains continue disappearing, the Earth of the distant future may become increasingly unfamiliar to human imagination. Not because the planet ends, but because it changes once again into something different. The process would unfold slowly beyond any human timescale. Rain would continue falling against exposed stone. Rivers would continue carrying sediments toward the oceans. Peaks would lose height century after century, while valleys widened beneath erosion. The transformation would feel invisible within a single lifetime, yet over millions of years the continents themselves could begin looking profoundly altered. The world humans know today depends deeply on elevated terrain. Mountains redirect winds. They gather snow. They stabilize river systems and influence where rain falls across entire continents. Forests, grasslands, wetlands, and agricultural regions all exist within climate systems shaped partly by high elevations interacting with atmosphere and water. But if those elevations decline enough, the systems surrounding them must eventually change as well. Rainfall patterns could shift across enormous regions. Some rivers fed by mountain snowmelt might weaken or disappear entirely. Valleys once fertile through regular flooding and mineral-rich sediments could slowly dry beneath changing climates. Ocean circulation patterns may adjust as atmospheric systems evolve around flatter continents. The Earth would not become lifeless. It would become different, and perhaps the strangest part of all is that this future may resemble the planet's distant past more than the modern world humans consider normal. Before enormous mountain systems dominated the continents, the Earth operated beneath broader horizons, weaker climatic divisions, and more open atmospheric circulation. The cycle may eventually return. Not exactly, because the Earth never repeats itself perfectly but in rhythm. Mountains rise through geological pressure. They reshape climate and ecosystems. Then erosion slowly removes them while the planet transitions toward new environmental conditions once again. The modern world exists somewhere in the middle of that process. There is something deeply unsettling about realizing that familiar landscapes are temporary. Human beings instinctively treat the present Earth as stable because civilization depends on that assumption. Rivers appear permanent. Seasons feel reliable. Coastlines seem fixed enough to build cities beside them. Yet geological time tells a different story. The world humans inherited may represent only one brief arrangement of climate, terrain, and ecosystems inside a planetary cycle still unfolding beneath civilization itself. Human lifespans are simply too short to witness the full scale of transformation occurring across continents and oceans. The Earth changes more slowly than memory. That perspective alters the meaning of permanence entirely. The mountains visible today are not final versions of the landscape. The rivers crossing continents are not eternal systems. Even climate patterns humanity depends upon may belong only to this particular stage of Earth's long history. Future life may adapt to environments humans would barely recognize now. There could be regions where ancient peaks once stood but only low hills remain beneath unfamiliar skies. Former river valleys might become dry plains, while new waterways emerge elsewhere across changing terrain. Ecosystems would evolve within those conditions exactly as life has always done throughout Earth's history. The planet continues moving whether humanity remains present or not. And there is something strangely peaceful hidden inside that realization. Earth does not fear transformation. Oceans shift, mountains rise and vanish, climates warm and cool. Life adapts, disappears, and evolves again within endless environmental change. The world never truly ends. It simply becomes something else. Perhaps that is the deepest illusion human civilization ever created for itself. The belief that the current Earth is the natural or final version of the planet. In reality, The modern world may only exist during a brief geological moment balanced between older landscapes already gone and future landscapes still waiting to emerge from time, erosion, and the slow movement of the earth beneath the oceans and skies. And within that immense cycle, humanity itself occupies only a passing moment between worlds. Human beings often imagine themselves at the center of history. Civilizations measure time through kings, wars, discoveries, and generations. Entire cultures rise believing their moment represents the height of the world's story. Yet beyond cities, beyond memory, and beyond human ambition, the Earth continues moving through cycles so vast that civilization itself becomes difficult to perceive within them. The mountains reveal that scale more clearly than almost anything else. They existed long before humanity appeared. They shaped climates before the first human language formed. Rivers descended from their slopes, while early ancestors still wandered through unfamiliar landscapes beneath ancient skies. Entire ecosystems evolved because mountains divided the Earth into separate worlds millions of years before civilization existed to notice. And one day, those mountains will continue changing long after humanity disappears. That realization carries a strange emotional weight. The modern world feels permanent because human memory is short. Cities appear ancient from the perspective of civilization. Nations feel enduring. Mountains seem eternal because they survive longer than human history itself. But geological time tells a quieter and far larger story unfolding beneath all of it. Mountains rise, mountains fall. The Earth reshapes itself endlessly, and humanity exists somewhere between those transformations. Perhaps that is the deepest truth hidden inside the history of mountains. The planet never created landscapes for human beings. Rivers were flowing before civilization. Climate systems organized themselves before agriculture. Mountain ranges altered oceans and ecosystems long before any living creature understood what was happening. Humanity inherited a world already in motion. The peaks humans climb, worship, fear, and depend upon belong to cycles so immense that even civilizations become temporary events within them. Entire cultures appeared beneath mountain horizons already ancient beyond comprehension. Future civilizations, if they exist at all, may inherit landscapes transformed into something unrecognizable from the world people know now. The Earth does not pause for human history. There is something oddly calming about that perspective. Human beings often search for permanence because permanence feels safe. Yet mountains, despite their immense presence, reveal that nothing on Earth truly remains fixed forever. Stone rises from ancient collisions deep beneath the crust. Rivers slowly carry it back toward the sea. Continents drift. Oceans change shape. Climate shifts. Life adapts and disappears. The process never ends. And somehow life continues within it anyway. The forests growing beside mountain valleys today exist because older ecosystems vanished long ago. Human civilization emerged because geological systems shaped stable climates and fertile landscapes over millions of years. Even the air humans breathe carries traces of ancient planetary cycles connecting mountains, oceans, rivers, and life across deep time. Everything belongs to the same motion. That understanding transforms mountains from simple landforms into something almost philosophical. They become reminders that the Earth itself is not an object, but a process continuously unfolding beneath silent skies. The present world is only the current shape of that process, balanced briefly between older landscapes already gone, and future landscapes still waiting to emerge. Humanity occupies only one passing moment inside the transformation. And perhaps that is why mountains affect human emotion so deeply. Standing beneath them creates an instinctive awareness of scale beyond ordinary life. They remind people that the world existed before them and will continue existing after them. Their silence contains time large enough to humble entire civilizations. Yet there is beauty inside that impermanence too. The Earth keeps changing, but life keeps adapting alongside it. Mountains rise and vanish, rivers shift, climates transform, and still the planet continues carrying new forms of existence forward through endless cycles of creation and erosion. Human civilization may only be a brief chapter written between the rise and fall of Earth's mountains. But for this moment, beneath these temporary peaks and these passing skies, humanity is here to witness the planet still becoming itself. Mountains do not only shape the Earth, they remember it. At first glance, a mountain appears silent and lifeless, nothing more than stone lifted high above valleys and clouds. Yet hidden inside those layers are fragments of worlds no human being ever witnessed. Ancient oceans, forgotten climates, creatures that disappeared hundreds of millions of years before civilization existed. Entire chapters of Earth's past remain trapped within the stone itself. The mountains are archives written in rock. Fossils of sea creatures have been discovered near the summits of enormous ranges where no ocean exists today. Shells, coral, and traces of ancient marine life rest thousands of meters above modern coastlines. Preserved inside rock, lifted skyward through continental collisions long after the seas themselves vanished. The implication feels almost impossible at first. Some mountains standing beneath cold winds and snow were once seabeds beneath warm, shallow oceans filled with life now completely gone from the earth, and the stone remembers all of it. Layer after layer preserves moments from environments erased long ago. Sedimentary rock carries traces of ancient storms that passed across vanished coastlines hundreds of millions of years before humanity appeared. Mineral patterns reveal climates unlike the modern world. Fossils preserve ecosystems that evolved, flourished, and disappeared while the continents themselves drifted slowly across the globe. The Earth leaves memories inside pressure and time. There is something deeply mysterious about imagining mountains not as landscapes, but as compressed history. Every exposed cliff face becomes part of a story stretching backward beyond human imagination. The colors within rock layers mark changing environments. Some layers formed beneath oceans, others beneath deserts, others within wetlands where ancient forests once grew before disappearing completely. The mountains contain worlds stacked on top of one another, and most of those worlds no longer exist anywhere else. That may be one of the strangest truths hidden within geological history. Mountains are among the few places where Earth's deep past remains physically visible. Without uplift and erosion exposing ancient rock, enormous portions of planetary history would remain buried forever beneath younger landscapes. The peaks reveal what time tried to hide. When continents collided and forced ancient seabeds upward, they unintentionally carried forgotten environments into view. Erosion then stripped away younger layers of stone, exposing fragments of worlds otherwise lost beneath the surface of the Earth. The mountains became windows into vanished ages. There is an unsettling beauty in standing before something that silently remembers oceans older than humanity itself. The cliffs appear still, yet within them are traces of storms, coastlines, and living creatures from eras so distant they almost feel unreal. The Earth speaks through fragments rather than complete stories. A fossil here, a layer of compressed sediment there, tiny clues surviving briefly before erosion removes them once again. Because even memory does not last forever. The same forces exposing ancient history also continue destroying it. Wind, rain, ice, and rivers gradually wear mountains away, carrying pieces of Earth's preserved past back toward the sea. Entire geological records disappear through erosion just as earlier landscapes vanished before them. The planet does not preserve memory intentionally. It only leaves traces behind temporarily, and somehow that makes the mountains feel even more extraordinary. They are not museums carefully protecting the past. They are accidental survivors within a restless world constantly reshaping itself. Fragments of vanished oceans remain visible only because geological forces briefly lifted them high enough for human eyes to see before time removes them again. The mountains remember ancient worlds silently. But eventually, humanity learned how to read those memories hidden inside stone. Fossils, folded rock layers, and ancient sediments slowly revealed that the Earth beneath civilization carried a history far older, stranger, and more dynamic than human beings had ever imagined possible before. For most of history, humanity looked at mountains without truly understanding what they were. People feared them, worshipped them, crossed them, and built civilizations beside them. Myths described them as eternal pillars holding the world in place. Their silence and immense scale made them appear older than change itself. Mountains seemed fixed beyond time, untouched by the rise and fall of human history below. Then slowly humanity began noticing details that did not belong. Shells appeared high above sea level, embedded within stone. Strange layers of rock curved upward as though solid ground had once bent beneath unimaginable pressure. Fossils of ancient sea life rested near frozen peaks where no ocean had existed for millions of years. The mountains were hiding contradictions. At first, these discoveries felt almost impossible to explain. If the world had always existed in its present form, how could traces of vanished oceans appear near the summits of enormous ranges? Why did some cliffs reveal stacked layers suggesting ancient environments buried beneath one another across immense spans of time? The Earth suddenly seemed older than anyone imagined. Humanity began studying mountains differently. Explorers and curious observers examined exposed rock layers not simply as scenery but as evidence. Stone became a form of memory, preserving traces of worlds no civilization had witnessed directly, and gradually a new understanding emerged. The mountains were not eternal structures fixed since the beginning of time. They were moving parts within a restless planet constantly reshaping itself beneath oceans and skies. Continents drifted, ancient seabeds rose into the atmosphere. Landscapes formed and vanished across spans of time so enormous they shattered ordinary human perception. The Earth itself was alive with motion. That realization transformed human understanding forever. Ancient stories describing mountains as permanent foundations of the world suddenly collapsed beneath geological evidence hidden inside the peaks themselves. Stone revealed that oceans had once covered regions now standing thousands of meters above sea level. Entire climates disappeared, continents collided and separated again over hundreds of millions of years. Human civilization occupied only a tiny fraction of Earth's story, and without mountains, much of that story might never have been discovered at all. The exposed layers within elevated terrain allowed people to reconstruct fragments of ancient worlds long after those environments vanished completely. Fossils preserved life forms erased from existence before humanity appeared. Sedimentary layers revealed ancient rivers, coastlines, deserts and storms buried beneath modern landscapes. The mountains became translators between the present and the unreachable past. There is something deeply emotional about that shift in perspective. Humanity did not simply gain scientific information. It experienced a profound change in its understanding of reality itself. The world became older, stranger, and vastly more dynamic than earlier civilizations ever imagined possible. The ground beneath human history no longer felt stable. Instead, Earth appeared as an endless process of transformation unfolding across incomprehensible spans of time. Continents moved silently, mountains rose and dissolved, oceans appeared and vanished, species evolved and disappeared while the planet continued reshaping itself without pause. And yet, the mountains only revealed fragments. That may be the most haunting part of all. Humanity learned enough to realize how little it truly understood. Each discovery exposed deeper layers of complexity hidden beneath the surface of the Earth. Every fossil raised new questions about forgotten ecosystems. Every folded rock formation hinted at forces operating beyond ordinary human experience. The mountains spoke, but never completely. Even now, countless geological secrets remain hidden inside ranges people believe they already understand. Entire chapters of Earth's history may still wait buried beneath stone, invisible except for tiny traces exposed briefly before erosion removes them once again. The planet reveals its past slowly, and perhaps that endless mystery is why mountains continue affecting human emotions so powerfully. They are not only landscapes, they are reminders that the Earth beneath civilization contains histories older, deeper, and beyond humanity may ever fully comprehend. And hidden inside that realization is another truth waiting quietly beneath the stone. Permanence itself may only be an illusion created by human perspective. Human beings instinctively look at mountains and think of permanence. The peaks appear unchanged while generations pass beneath them. Empires rise, flourish, and disappear while the same ridges continue standing against the horizon exactly as before. Cities collapse into ruins, languages vanish, entire civilizations become forgotten history, yet the mountains remain. Or at least they appear to. That appearance may be one of the greatest illusions the Earth ever created. Geology tells a completely different story hidden beneath the silence of stone. Mountains rise through continental collisions. They fracture beneath ice and storms. Rivers carry them slowly toward the oceans grain by grain. Entire ranges collapse into low hills before vanishing almost completely from the surface of the planet. The Earth never stops reshaping them. but human beings rarely notice because human lives are too brief. A civilization lasting 1,000 years feels ancient from the perspective of human history. Yet within geological time, 1,000 years is almost invisible. Mountains change across spans so immense that civilizations disappear before the transformation becomes obvious. The peaks appear eternal only because people witness such a tiny fraction of their existence. The mountains move too slowly for memory. That realization quietly changes the meaning of permanence itself. Perhaps permanence is not a real condition within the natural world at all. Perhaps it is only the feeling created when something changes more slowly than humans can perceive directly. Mountains seem fixed because their transformation unfolds beyond ordinary experience, not because they are truly unchanging. And if that is true, then much of human existence may rest upon the same illusion. Civilizations, monuments hoping to outlast time. Cultures preserve traditions across generations. People search for stable identities, lasting achievements, and permanent meaning inside a world constantly shifting beneath them. Human beings long for continuity because impermanence feels unsettling. Yet the Earth offers no true stillness anywhere. Oceans open and disappear. Continents drift. Climates transform. Species evolve and vanish. Mountains rise, collapse, and return to the sea through endless cycles repeating across deep time. Even the landscapes humans trust most are temporary shapes inside a moving planet. Life survives not through permanence, but through adaptation. There is something strangely calming hidden inside that perspective. The Earth does not resist change. It exists through change. Rivers continue flowing even as valleys transform around them. Ecosystems evolve beneath shifting climates. New worlds emerge from the disappearance of older ones. The planet remains alive precisely because nothing remains fixed forever. And perhaps humanity's emotional connection to mountains comes partly from sensing that contradiction instinctively. The peaks appear stable enough to comfort human imagination while secretly embodying the exact opposite truth. They are monuments to motion hidden inside the illusion of stillness. The mountains teach impermanence through silence. There is a dreamlike quality to imagining the tallest ranges on Earth as temporary forms already moving slowly toward disappearance. Snow resting on high ridges today will someday melt beneath unfamiliar skies. Rivers descending through deep valleys will continue carrying fragments of mountains toward distant oceans long after modern civilizations are gone. The process never stops. Even now, while cities glow beneath the night and human history continues unfolding, across continents, the mountains are changing invisibly. Rain weakens stone, ice fractures exposed cliffs, sediments drift through rivers toward the sea. The landscapes people consider ancient are already becoming something else. And one day, future worlds may look back upon the modern Earth the same way humanity now studies vanished ancient landscapes preserved inside stone. Because mountains are not symbols of permanence after all. They are temporary shapes moving through an endless planetary cycle larger than civilization, larger than memory, and larger than any human lifetime could ever fully comprehend beneath the silent turning of the Earth. The ancient Earth without mountains never truly disappeared. It still exists beneath the modern world, buried under continents, hidden beneath oceans, preserved inside stone lifted toward the sky by forces operating across billions of years. The flatter planet that once stretched beneath unfamiliar skies was not erased from existence. It was covered, folded, submerged, and transformed into the Earth humans know now. Fragments of that forgotten world remain everywhere. Deep beneath modern mountain ranges lie traces of ancient surfaces formed long before the peaks themselves existed. Seabeds rest high above the clouds inside elevated rock layers. Deserts contain sediments deposited beneath vanished oceans. Ancient plains survive buried beneath younger landscapes shaped by later geological cycles. The Earth carries its previous worlds inside itself. That realization changes the meaning of history completely. Human beings often imagine the past as something distant and gone, separated from the present by time alone. Yet geological history behaves differently. Older worlds do not simply vanish. They remain hidden beneath newer ones, compressed into layers of stone and sediment while the planet continuously rebuilds itself above them. The Earth resembles an endless layering of realities. Ancient plains became mountains, oceans became deserts, river valleys disappeared beneath glaciers and seas. Entire landscapes transformed so completely that the modern world now rests directly upon environments almost impossible to imagine from the surface alone. And still, traces survive. A fossil hidden within stone, ancient sediments buried beneath a city, folded rock lifted from ocean floors into towering peaks. The forgotten earth continues speaking quietly through fragments preserved beneath the landscapes people consider normal today. There is something deeply cyclical about that perspective. The documentary began with a mountainless world that seemed alien compared to the present Earth. But now the audience understands that ancient planet was never truly lost. It became part of the foundation beneath modern existence. The Earth humans inherited was built directly upon the remains of earlier worlds transformed through geological time. The past survives invisibly beneath the present. And perhaps the strangest realization of all is that the modern world is temporary in exactly the same way. Future landscapes are already beginning to form beneath civilization now. Continents continue drifting slowly through darkness beneath the oceans. Mountains rise while others erode away. Rivers reshape valleys grain by grain. Geological cycles continue unfolding beneath cities, roads, and human history exactly as they did before humanity appeared. The Earth is still becoming something else. One day, the modern world may itself become buried beneath future landscapes no human civilization will ever witness. Current coastlines could vanish beneath shifting seas. Mountain ranges may collapse into lower terrain. Regions now fertile may become deserts while unfamiliar ecosystems emerge elsewhere across transformed continents. The cycle never truly ends. There is something calming hidden inside that endless transformation. The Earth does not mourn its older worlds, it carries them forward inside newer forms. Ancient oceans become mountains. Mountains dissolve into rivers. Rivers feed future landscapes where new forms of life eventually emerge. Nothing disappears completely. It changes. And perhaps that is why mountains affect human imagination so powerfully. They are not only landscapes standing above civilization, they are visible reminders that the planet beneath human history contains older worlds layered silently beneath it. Every cliff face and valley exists within a chain of transformation stretching backward far beyond memory and forward into futures still invisible. Humanity lives within only one temporary version of the Earth. Beneath cities, forests, and mountain ranges rest fragments of forgotten planets hidden inside this one. Ancient environments remain folded into the stone beneath human civilization, waiting quietly beneath the surface, while the Earth continues reshaping itself once again beneath the same silent sky tonight. Human civilization exists within an unusually quiet moment in Earth's history. Not perfectly stable, because the planet beneath humanity still moves continuously, but stable enough for rivers to flow predictably, seasons to repeat, and ecosystems to support billions of lives across continents shaped through ancient geological time. That stability did not appear suddenly. It emerged from processes unfolding long before humanity existed. Mountains redirected winds, oceans adjusted to shifting continents. Rivers carried nutrients across valleys for millions of years before the first cities appeared beside them. Climate systems gradually settled into patterns life could survive within consistently enough for civilization to grow. Humanity inherited the results of ancient planetary change. Everything civilization depends upon carries traces of geological history hidden beneath it. Fertile soil exists because mountains eroded slowly through rain and rivers. Stable water systems survive because elevated terrain still gathers snow and moisture high above the plains. Forests, grasslands, and coastlines developed within climates shaped partly by collisions between continents older than human memory itself. The Earth prepared conditions for civilization long before civilization understood the Earth. There is something deeply humbling about that realization. Human beings often imagine themselves as separate from nature, standing above the system surrounding them. Cities rise against the landscape. Technology appears to distance civilization from weather, rivers, forests, and mountains. Yet beneath modern life, ancient geological cycles still operate continuously. The same rivers feeding ancient civilizations still descend from mountain systems formed millions of years ago. The atmosphere still moves around elevated terrain exactly as it did before humanity appeared. Oceans continue redistributing heat through patterns shaped partly by continents drifting slowly across the globe. Civilization exists inside those systems, not outside them, and perhaps that is why human history feels both extraordinary and fragile at the same time. The achievements of civilization are remarkable. Languages, art, architecture, science, culture, memory, all emerged during a brief geological moment balanced carefully enough for large populations to survive and grow. Entire empires transformed the world within only a few thousand years. Yet compared to geological time, even the greatest civilizations appear almost fleeting. Mountains rise and disappear across spans so immense that human history occupies only a thin layer within them. Oceans shift, continents move, landscapes transform repeatedly, while civilizations briefly emerge between those changes before fading again into the larger movement of the Earth. The planet continues beyond every empire. That perspective does not diminish humanity. Instead, it gives human existence a different kind of meaning. Civilization becomes part of a much older planetary story already unfolding long before humans arrived. People are not separate from Earth's transformation. They are participants inside it, shaped continuously by systems ancient enough to feel almost eternal. The mountains understood this long before humanity did. They gathered water before agriculture existed. They shaped climate before language formed. They influenced migration, ecosystems, and survival while human ancestors still wandered beneath unfamiliar skies. And long after modern civilizations disappear, geological cycles will continue reshaping the Earth again. Future worlds may inherit landscapes completely different from the present one. There is something bittersweet about imagining distant civilizations, or perhaps entirely different forms of life, looking back upon human history the same way modern people study vanished ancient landscapes buried inside stone. Cities may someday become geological traces hidden beneath future terrain. Human culture could survive only through fragments preserved briefly before erosion and time reshaped the surface once more. The Earth keeps moving regardless. And perhaps that is the quiet truth hidden beneath all of geological history. Humanity never stood outside the planet's transformation. Civilization emerged during one temporary balance between ancient worlds already gone and future worlds still waiting beneath the surface of time itself, beyond human memory and imagination entirely. The story does not end, it slows, it softens. It settles into silence once again, the same silence that existed before mountains rose, before rivers carved valleys, before civilizations appeared beneath changing skies. The Earth continues moving quietly beneath everything humanity calls permanent. Mountains are still rising tonight. Deep beneath the Himalayas, continents continue pressing against one another with forces older than memory. Elsewhere, storms and rivers are already wearing those same peaks away grain by grain. Snow falls across elevated ridges while water descends toward the oceans, carrying fragments of mountains back toward the sea. The cycle continues exactly as it always has. Most people never notice it. Human life unfolds too quickly to easily perceive geological motion. Cities glow through the night while the ground beneath them shifts almost invisibly across immense spans of time. Rivers appear eternal because civilizations are brief. Mountains seem fixed because human memory cannot fully grasp the scale of their transformation. Yet the Earth never stops changing, and perhaps that has always been the hidden truth quietly surrounding human existence. The mountains humans admire reshaped far more than the horizon. They altered rainfall and climate long before civilization existed. They redirected rivers, influenced oceans, divided ecosystems, and changed the path of evolution itself. They shaped migration, mythology, agriculture, and survival while humanity remained unaware of the scale of influence involved. Stone quietly transformed the planet. The modern world emerged inside those changes. Forests, deserts, fertile valleys, coastlines, and civilizations all developed within conditions shaped partly by geological systems operating across millions of years. Even the atmosphere humans breathe carries traces of ancient exchanges between mountains, oceans, rivers, and life. And still the process continues beneath the present world now. That realization feels strange because modern civilization often treats the Earth as stable background scenery surrounding human history. Mountains become landmarks, rivers become resources, seasons feel permanent enough to build societies around. Yet none of these systems are truly fixed. The Earth humans know today is temporary. The mountains visible now are not final forms. Continents will continue drifting, Oceans will shift. Some peaks will vanish while future ranges rise elsewhere beneath skies no civilization alive today will ever witness. Landscapes considered ancient and permanent are only current arrangements within a planet endlessly reshaping itself. The world remains unfinished. There is something peaceful hidden inside that understanding. The Earth does not resist change. It exists through change. Ancient worlds vanished, yet new worlds emerged from them. Mountains rose from former seabeds. Rivers carved life from stone. Ecosystems adapted again and again beneath shifting climates and transforming continents. Nothing remains forever, yet life continues within the motion anyway. Perhaps that is why mountains affect human emotions so deeply. Standing beneath them creates an instinctive awareness of time larger than civilization itself. Their silence carries reminders that humanity occupies only one brief moment inside a story, stretching billions of years into the past and continuing far beyond the future. The Earth will keep becoming something else. And maybe the most beautiful part of all is that this transformation never announces itself loudly. The greatest changes in planetary history often unfold quietly. A mountain rises millimeter by millimeter beneath clouds. A river carries stone toward the sea. An ocean current shifts slowly around changing continents. The world transforms through patience. Tonight, somewhere beneath silent skies, mountains are still rising while rivers quietly carry them away again. Storms continue crossing elevated ridges. Oceans continue reshaping coastlines. The Earth keeps moving through cycles older than humanity and larger than memory itself. The ancient mountainless world was never truly lost. It became this one. And one day, this world will become something else.